Welcome back, everybody, to the Popanimecomics Lounge, where I have with me Chris Edergly, who is a comedian, actor, singer, and voice actor who has been in Naruto Shippuden, Drawn Together, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, The Simpsons, and several other video games, to name a few projects you've been involved in. So thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, although I would contest the label of singer. I'm not much of one, but I've sung on a couple of Simpsons episodes. Maybe that's how that rumor got started.
And now I can already tell you're a funny guy right from the start. So we're
Yeah.
just going to dive right into this because your journey into voice acting is very untraditional, as you started up as a stand-up comic. How did you get into this?
Well, it's something I actually talk about a little bit in my YouTube series I've got called VO Notes, and I talk a little bit about how I got into it. And there's no one way to get into voice acting or any kind of acting. If you're a creative type and you've decided that you're going to follow that path, you could be coming from anywhere. In my case, I got into stand-up comedy in college because some friends told me I should try it. And I had people telling me for years, it's like, oh, you do all those funny voices, you're always with the jokes, you should give it a shot. So I did, and I liked it. And for about 10 years, I made a living, not a very good one, but I made a living touring as a comic. And I just got tired of the travel. It really is a very demanding life. If you're going to grow a career in stand-up, you do have to be on the road a lot. So I decided to segue into voice acting because I did a little bit of voice acting in Orlando, Florida. That's where I moved after college, and I did a little acting there and did my stand-up from there. That was my home base, and managed to book a few voice acting jobs there. And it just sort of carried over from when I moved to Los Angeles. It took me 2 or 3 years to find an agent in L.A. I got an agent in L.A. because of the work I had done on a theme park ride that's in Orlando called the Spider-Man, Universal's Islands of Adventure, Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man ride. And so based on my work on that ride, I got a meeting with an agent, and she signed me, Pat Brady. And then she went to a bigger agency, and I went with her, and I've been with her for 19 years, April. So it was a roundabout way to get into it, but I can say that my stand-up background helped me a lot in voice acting. It's a really big plus if you've done any kind of live performing, for sure.
And now, given that you had this stand-up background, what was like the hardest thing for you to go from being a stand-up comic, because that has its own culture, to really entering this acting and voice acting world?
You're right in that it does have its own culture. The hardest thing for me was mainly the hours, because in the world of stand-up, you can look at your calendar in January, and if you've got a good manager or if you hustle, you can basically see where you're going to be working for at least the next 6 months, sometimes up to the next year. So your year is structured. You know when you're going to be in town, out of town. A lot of things are planned out for you. And when you have shows, you don't have to be anywhere until the evening. And so the whole day builds up to the show at night. And voice acting is the direct opposite of that. It is very uncertain. It's by the seat of your pants. You never know when you're going to work. If you're lucky, you audition every day, and I get to audition just about every day. But the day starts in the morning with most people's days. You get your auditions out of the way, and then the day is free. And so it took me a little while to get used to that. It freaked me out a little bit in the beginning because I was so used to building up to something at night, and to reverse that and to know that everything I was working for in the day was done and it was only about 11 a.m. It was a weird adjustment at first, but I got used to it.
And now I kind of want to talk about that because you're coming out of this stand-up sort of adult world, and I don't mean adult
Sure.
as in other bad world, but typically stand-up clubs, bars, things like that.
Right.
And now, what was it like to go on your first audition out of that world into this new one?
It wasn't that big of a deal because I had done a little bit of voice acting and I had done some on-camera acting. And so auditions were the easiest part. They're some of the most fun you can have because 99.9% of your auditions in voice acting are going to be stuff you do either at your agent's office or nowadays it's going to be stuff you do from home. Most voice actors I know, especially the ones that work a lot, just read from home. We have a mic set up. In my case, I have a booth. I have a nice little sound set up, and the agency will email me the copy for my auditions the day before, and they'll tell me what day it's due, and the directions will all be there, and I just step into my booth, and I knock them out one at a time, and when I'm done, I'm done. So in the beginning, It was just getting used to the office, because this was back, I'd say, in 2000s, signed with Pat Brady at a smaller agency, and I just got used to going into the office there. And once you're comfortable, then it's fine. And then moving to a bigger agency was a little daunting at first, and then you just get used to it. So it's really just about getting used to the environment. Once you are, your performing experience takes over.
And now voice acting has changed. The early 2000s were the three beeps, and now we're sort of in a different era where things are more digitally recorded. What was that like, and what is it like for you to sort of live through that? Because there's all these voice actors who haven't experienced the pain of the old recording era.
It's funny, when I started, they were still recording your audition onto a cassette tape, and they would messenger them to the recording studios or the production offices around town. So they would literally send them by courier or by mail, and then you would find out if you booked it. And then within a couple of years, it started being all online. And then things really kind of took off from there. And I would say for the past probably 10 or 12 years, most of what I've done has been recording from home. So I was at the tail end of the traditional way of recording people. And I assume when you talk about the three beeps, the only reference I have for the three beeps now is when I do looping or ADR work or anime loop, where you hear three beeps to cue you up, and on that imaginary fourth beep, you come in with your line. So that still exists in certain types of jobs. So that's still a thing you have to get used to and get practiced in. But technology has changed the game completely, because when I was first getting into it, it was not as competitive as it is now, because just not as many people knew about it and not as many people were able to get into it. And now anyone with a good home setup, even if they don't have an agent, can read for non-union stuff and get in the game.
And now that's a perfect segue into something that may or may not be related, but it does come out of Japan, and that is one of your most recognizable roles. And that is Sid Highwind from Final Fantasy Advent Children. What's the story behind this one?
You know, it was so long ago when I first did it, it was just another audition. And some of the biggest things I've done were just auditions. It was one of a group of things I read for that day, I'm pretty sure, and they just liked my read. And I recorded it, I remember, at Bang Zoom Studios over in North Hollywood, which I go to occasionally still. And very nice gentleman that came in from the production company and worked with me on it. And we had a great time recording it. And then the movie came out, and I had no idea how big that culture was, just how many people were really into the Final Fantasy world. And then I did them for a few video games after that, and I still get noticed for it. I've even got a piece of art that a fan sent me from somewhere around the world where they just did a painting of an anime character I did, and people really get into it. But it was just another audition for me, and it was certainly a lot of fun to record. And I don't look at Sid as just another character I've played, because he's certainly had an impact on a lot of people. But it was so long ago. It's hard to remember all the details.
And how do you feel that you got to voice a character that really cuts across a lot of multimedia platforms, and that you had no idea going in, but it turns out that it really has touched a lot of people? How does that make you feel as an actor, knowing that your work has reached that point?
It always feels great. The whole point of being an actor is that you're supposed to be telling a story. And it's not much of a story if you don't have an audience. And stand-up is you performing in front of a live audience, and you're making an immediate connection. It's very satisfying. With acting and voice acting, especially voice acting, because usually it's for something that's animated, that can be months before you see the final product, sometimes more than a year. You have to wait to see if it makes a connection with people. And sometimes it takes a year after it's even been released before you really see how it's affected people. So anytime you have a character that people will recognize and will maybe tweet at you or make a YouTube comment about, it really feels good. It's satisfying. And the funny thing is that there are plenty of times when somebody says that they didn't like a performance you gave, or they didn't like a character you voiced. And I don't get that bothered by that, because somebody was impacted by it. Maybe they didn't like it very much, but it shows that what we do travels around the world instantly, and it affects a lot of people. It's not rocket science, and we're not curing cancer, but it's always satisfying to know that your work is reaching an audience.
And now I want to touch upon another work that also might reach an audience, but in a different format, and this is your work on Drawn Together as a
Yeah.
few characters, and that show is not, I wouldn't say politically correct, for lack of a better word. It's making fun of a lot of things in society, and it's really satire. So what was it like working on that show, being that you were coming from a comic background?
It was a lot of fun. I came in just to help out with some table reads, and they would give me a character or two to do. And I used to joke with the writers, the creators of the show. I used to say, you guys are so over the top offensive, I think that maybe no one's even going to notice anymore. And they said, yeah, we keep waiting for somebody to really get angry. And that show was so gleefully politically incorrect that I think people just got used to it. It's a lot like South Park. South Park takes on everybody. They don't make any apologies for it. And that's what Drawn Together was like. It was certainly fun to record. And yeah, so many of the jokes you're doing, these are just not jokes you would tell in church. But that was what the show was. It didn't represent itself as anything other than that. Yes, it was satire. And that's what satire is supposed to do. It's supposed to make you feel a little uncomfortable.
And speaking about being uncomfortable, following this up was Celebrity Deathmatch, the revival.
Yeah, that was another one where we had a great time performing and recording that. I mean, some of the most fun I've had recording were in those Celebrity Deathmatch sessions, because that's another show that was really just joyously over the top. I mean, it was claymation, and they just loved going over the top. That was the whole point of the show. And we always did this as a group. So you would get everybody in there. I would be in there with my co-stars, and we would do one episode a session. And so there would always be 3 fights every episode. So we'd have 4, 5, 6 guest stars coming in and out that were doing voice matches for these celebrities fighting. And it was such a great time. That's a show I truly wish I could still be working on to this day, because we had so many laughs in the studio with that one.
And my favorite thing with this show is the role that you were in, because you were a commentator. And so how'd you get into that mindset where you're calling a fight between celebrities who may or may not have some issues with each other? They're fighting, and you're calling it as a real fight. How'd you get into the mindset with not breaking down with laughter throughout the entire recording?
Well, not every take was usable sometimes because we were laughing so much. And it's just acting, you put on your pretend cap and you do the job, and every now and then you break up laughing and you just sort of do another take. But it's all in jest, all in good fun. And I don't think we ever had any celebrities actually get mad at us. I think most of them weren't even aware of the show, because it's sort of this cult show that I don't think it made it onto their radar. So we never really worried about that.
And speaking of it being a cult show, obviously there were a lot of episodes before, and this was sort of a revival, the 16-episode revival. Was there any pressure on your end, knowing that fans previously loved this and that they might be disappointed, or they might not like the new way it's going or who's in it?
I never really felt any pressure. I mean, we knew that we were the second life of the show, and we were not the original cast, but we didn't really worry about whether or not people were going to like it or not. I mean, you always want your work to be accepted, but it's also out of your hands. So we just knew, let's just go in there and do the best we can, and people will decide for themselves. I've certainly noticed that, especially in the world of anime, people have much stronger opinions than I ever encountered having to do with Celebrity Deathmatch. So that was never really an issue for me.
Well, we are going to get to some anime, but first we need to talk about Harvey Birdman, attorney at law, because some of these celebrities or some of these people who were in these fights might need their contracts figured out here. So what was it like being on this show as Peter Potamus?
Peter Potamus. That's another cult show that I discovered later on has a pretty loyal following. And as a matter of fact, just last year, we did a revival of it, just sort of a one-off special, like an hour special. And it was, I think, Harvey Birdman, Attorney General. And it was a lot of fun. Peter Potamus is one of my favorite characters I've ever played. I love doing his voice, loved his personality. And we ended up getting to work with some pretty big names, too. Stephen Colbert's the one that you think of, obviously, but Gary Cole as the lead is amazing, and he's in everything. And just my co-stars, too. People like Paget Brewster was amazing on it as Bird Girl. And there's too many people to list, but Maurice LaMarche did a lot. There's no way I could list all the names. I'll forget too many of them. But that was one of my all-time favorite experiences.
And what was it like for you? I mean, we mentioned the movie. What was it like for you to return to this show and having such a cult fan base and people loving it 11 years later and having the opportunity to reprise your role? What does that mean for you as a voice actor?
Yeah, it's a thrill because you record something and then you do your 3 seasons of it and it goes away because most of the things you do only last a few seasons if you're lucky. And then it goes away, but it lives on. Even though you're not recording new episodes, it lives on the internet, on cable, on DVD. And there was enough of a following where they decided, yeah, it's worth it to go back and do another show of this, just a 1-hour show, and just to see how it's received. And seems to have done pretty well. And it was just nice seeing the creators again, too, Michael Oweline and Eric Richter, that they were still at it. They were still making really cool, funny stuff. A lot of it is just getting to see those faces again. That's part of the thrill.
And now I kind of want to jump off network and talk a little bit about Netflix and something that you were in for them, which is DreamWorks Dragons. And your role in particular is Gobber in Dragon Riders of Berk, and then the follow-up, which is Race to the Edge.
That one was also something I had a lot of fun doing because the people we got to work with on it were just some of the best. My friend Nolan North, I believe it's Stoic was his character. And he's a buddy of mine. We've known each other for years, and it was just really fun to work on the same show for so many episodes. And just to be part of a really cool franchise, too. Those movies are really big movies, and they've had a great impact on animation and feature animation at that. And it was just really nice to do something like that for DreamWorks, too. They were always super cool people. I've had so few negative experiences in general in my career recording. You know, I could count them on one hand. And none of these have happened with these big jobs. It's always been everything you think it would be. It's as fun as you think it would be. It's as rewarding as you think it would be. And it's as satisfying as you think it would be when people tell you that they know the show and they like what you did.
And DreamWorks Dragons is a nice franchise. The third movie just came out, and the voice cast in the movies and in the shows, some people overlap and some people don't. You obviously replaced Craig Ferguson as Gobber. What was that like in voice matching and getting into that voice and really taking it in a new direction, kind of filling in the blanks of the story?
Right, because the audition for that was exhausting because they wanted to get me as pitch perfect as possible. That was probably technically the most challenging audition I've ever had as far as voice matching because they really wanted me to get as close as possible. And then once you have the job and you're in there recording, then it's okay for you to start technically don't want to change the voice because you still want to stay in the pocket of what Craig Ferguson has done in the movies. But you can't just refer to his performance every single time for every single beat that you're doing your show on because there are so many new stories they're telling. So at some point, you're just going to be using your own imagination, doing that technically correct voice as much as you can make it. And so, yeah, you're bringing something of yourself to that character, whether you like it or not. And I always had them there to make sure that I didn't stray too far from what Gobber is. So it was a thrill. I keep using that word because I've had this really cool career, but it's a thrill just to say that I'm voicing a character that Craig Ferguson originated because I think that guy is hilarious.
And how do you feel that these works and these DreamWorks Dragons on Netflix really are sort of canon and fill in the blanks with the movies and how everything is now really coming together from Cartoon Network to Netflix to the 3 movies, the trilogies with it ending, I think just came out. How do you feel that you're really part of that entire franchise, for lack of a better word here?
I was honored to play my very small part in it. And I used to ask them, how does this tie in with the movies? And they say, it's the same world, obviously. It's the same characters, but it's all going to be tied together eventually. And that's what they did. And the last episodes came out fairly recently, but we finished recording them over a year ago. And you had to wait for all of this to get tied together officially. And now that this third movie is out, yeah, it seems to be buttoned up quite nicely. And again, it's just very satisfying to know that you got to be a part of it, and it's an honor, frankly.
And one of the things I like about DreamWorks Dragons and the trilogy and all the shows is that they are aimed at a more kid-friendly audience. And you've been in more adult roles, you've been in some children's roles. How do you feel that with this role that you got to go the kids route? considering that you're a parent?
I love doing that because it is stuff my kids can see. And they've seen a little bit of it, but they're still pretty young. They're 5 and 7. And so that show's going to be on their radar when they get a little bit older. But I've been able to do a couple of younger shows as well that they've heard. And I love anything I've done can filter down to them, obviously as long as it's age appropriate. But the funny thing is that both of my kids are getting into voice acting now. My son Remy has already worked about a dozen jobs. So he's following in Dad's footsteps. I didn't push him into it either. He would see me recording and he would want to try it. And so he started doing it, and before you knew it, my agency was giving him auditions, and then he started booking them. And my daughter's trying it now, too. So in addition to enjoying working on shows that are for kids, now I'm really enjoying taking my son to work on some of those same shows. So it's become a generational occupation for the family now.
Does he have his SAG card yet?
He sure does. He joined last year. At 7 years old, he joined SAG. I was 30 when I joined, and my boy's in at 7. That just blows my mind.
And now to talk about a show that might not be age appropriate, and you are a member of the Akatsuki from Naruto Shippuden as Hiden.
Yeah.
Now, Hiden is a bit arrogant. He's very smart, very intelligent, a bit arrogant, looks down upon people, might be slightly violent, and might want to kill people who get other ninjas pregnant and that are expecting children. Not to ruin Naruto or anything. So what was it like to be a member of the Akatsuki?
Well, that's a show that people have very strong opinions on. I've seen clips of the stuff I've done on YouTube where people get mad because they don't think I pronounce some of the names properly, and I probably didn't. But Hiden was a fun character to do because he is a despicable guy. He's probably the worst human being as a character that I've ever voiced, but those are the really meaty roles, the villains, and he is a villain. There's no doubt about it. Funny thing is that character, like a lot of bad guys, has his fans, and people just love the sort of demented glee that he takes in doing what he does. And there's an old trope that if you're playing a villain, you really shouldn't be judgmental of them. If you want to play them convincingly, then you should just sort of see it from their point of view. Not that any normally sane person could see the world from Hiden's point of view, but just if you're going to pretend, then just try to play him straight up, be real about it, and have fun. It's an over-the-top show, once again, like a lot of anime. It's very intense.
And what I really like about Hiden and his arc all throughout Naruto is that in the 27 episodes you were in with him, roughly, you really got to see that fight play out between him and Team 10 and that pivotal moment where they more or less kill him. And it's a big growing moment for Team 10. How do you feel about that and what was going on, and really how it is a pivotal moment in Naruto that there are real consequences for actions? As you said, it's over the top.
It is, but I mean, still, you got to have some kind of moral compass. And Hiden, I guess he got killed as much as he could be killed. I remember him being kind of vivisected and buried, but I don't even know if that's enough to stop him. But he got what he deserved, didn't he? I mean, that's just not a good dude. As his voice, I have no problem saying that, yeah, that guy needed to be stopped. You don't want somebody like that running around crazy. So there are consequences, hopefully, for somebody as bad as him. And for someone to take him down, that's the way it should go.
And now, fortunately, Hiden had a very good attorney, maybe somebody like Harvey Birdman, as he had an out in his contract where he did a bunch of video game roles, and he ventured into other businesses as you voiced his character sort of in a unique way. And I'm not totally familiar. I believe he was in some video games before he was in the show, and then he was in a bunch after.
I remember doing the show first, and then after that, I think I did some video games. But I don't know how they timed the release of all these. So your guess is as good as mine.
But what was it like to voice him in a video game compared to the anime? Because those are very different voice acting mediums.
It wasn't much different as far as the performance goes. Still the character. The dialogue is a little different because a lot of it is just mainly centered around a fight. So you did a lot of taunting, a lot of fight noises and things like that. But for the most part, it's still the same character.
And obviously, Naruto fans have a very strong opinion. And if you go on YouTube or Twitter, people have an opinion on Hiden. What is the worst thing that you've ever seen with Hiden? And what is the greatest thing you've ever seen with Hiden on the internet?
I don't know if I can remember specific examples. I just know that for sure people have strong opinions about all the characters, and Hiden is no different. There are some people that really love him. They just love how bad he is. And then some people love to see him get his just desserts. And then, of course, there are a lot of people that just prefer the original Japanese, and they don't like the English dub as much. There are people who are more purists, and they want to watch the original Japanese and just read the subtitles. And in other cases, they have an appreciation for what we, as the English-speaking actors, were able to do with the dubbed dialogue, because it's never quite the same as what you're going to hear the Japanese actors saying. So I'm always grateful when somebody realizes that it's kind of tough to loop under those circumstances.
And obviously, Naruto at one point was one of the big three anime/mangas out there. And things have changed slightly in the anime world, but it's still very, very respectable. And Boruto out there, it's still very relevant. How does that make you feel that you got to be part of that in a non-filler type role?
Nice to be part of something that people still talk about, still have opinions about. And that's voiceover in a nutshell. If you stick around long enough, you're going to catch a few waves where you'll be a part of something big and you'll have higher visibility. And then you'll go back down to making a lot of things that people may not know about. I mean, a lot of the work I do is commercial work and stuff that by its very nature, invisible. They don't billboard that you're a part of it. You're helping to sell a product. And yet that pays a lot of bills. And so when you get to be a part of something that has an impact on animation culture, pretty satisfying.
And one of these roles that I wouldn't say makes you completely invisible, but you are definitely doing additional voice work for, is The Simpsons. And you've been doing that for 9 seasons, 2011 up to 2019 so far. How'd you get involved in that? Because that's kind of a big deal, even if you're doing just additional voice work.
Again, like every other job, you have to audition for it. You have to show that you're up for it. I was fortunate enough to be selected, and it's the greatest job I've had. It's the greatest job I ever will have. It's the greatest show of all time. These are the most talented people you could hope to work with. These are the funniest writers. These are the best producers. It's Mount Rushmore. So I'm happy just to play my little part, just to do a nice random character here and there to fill in wherever needed. And I just started my 10th season. We just did a table read for our first episode of season 31, I believe, and can't wait to get back to work. And that's probably the most significant job I will ever have. I don't think it's a stretch to say. As far as voice acting goes, being a part of that show is the coolest thing I think I've ever accomplished. And that's saying something because I've gotten to be on great shows like Harvey Birdman and Dragons and all of that. But The Simpsons is the thing that I still pinch myself that I'm on.
And now one of the coolest things, I think, and I think a lot of people might agree with me, is that you got to play Stewie Griffin on The Simpsons in their Christmas special.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, it was just sort of, they had a quick reference to, I think, Family Guy in a theme park, and they just wanted somebody who could do a Stewie Griffin voice, and nobody's going to sound exactly like Seth MacFarlane, but I guess I got in the ballpark there and they let me do it. It was just fun. And it was funny because I actually did one voice on Family Guy like 10 years ago, and Seth MacFarlane directed me for that. And it was just a really short line. I was surprised he even bothered to direct me for it, but that was just a cute little joke, you know, and I think they have a nice friendly back and forth going with Family Guy because they've done a crossover episode over the years. So, yeah, it was just fun to be a part of that one joke.
And now we're going to back out of America's favorite yellow family, and we're going to talk a little bit about video games that you've been a part of. Obviously, you've been part of Final Fantasy, you've done a bunch of Naruto games, but you've done, I think, over 100 video game roles. What are those like, and how do you go and get auditions for them? Is it similar to anime? Is it similar more to just regular voiceover?
It's hard to compare it to anything because it's its own thing. I did a lot more video games when I was younger, for whatever reason. A lot of it was, I just went on this run where I was doing tons of them. And as I got older, especially as I started working in animation more, I wanted to start trying to save my voice because video games can be pretty taxing. Obviously, they're very intense, and especially the games that are war games and first-person shooters and games like that, they can get pretty intense, and you can blow your voice out if you're not careful. Over the past several years, I've pulled way back from doing them, and most of the games you might have heard me on in the last few years, I'm not typically yelling my head off. But they are intense, and they are very demanding to record because you're usually in the studio for a few hours at a time, and you've got to do a lot of repetitive dialogue to cover every every possible scenario. And you've just got to stay focused. And the one I just did that I think a lot of people are catching on to is called Apex Legends, I believe. And that is a first-person shooter that came out, I guess, almost as an answer to Fortnite. And the character I play on that is Pathfinder. And Pathfinder's a robot, so he never shouts. And so that was great for me to be able to get to do a really fun, cool first-person shooter game and not have to scream my head off in order to do it. So I count myself lucky to get to be a part of something else that also culturally is starting to make an impact.
And to talk a little bit about Pathfinder and Apex Legend, it's very similar to Overwatch as well, and it's one of those games that's got a nice cult following and people are really interested in it. How does that make you feel that you are in a video game that is widely spread around and is really catching fire and people are really flocking to it and hearing your voice? And maybe they don't know it's your voice so much, but they're still hearing it.
Some people are starting to find out that it's me. I've had people find me on Twitter and YouTube and tell me they heard me on Apex Legends and that they like the character. And I was even talking to my brother today. He lives in Texas, and he told me that he and his son have been playing that game religiously and that they really love the game. Although it's funny because my brother doesn't play my character. He says, yeah, Pathfinder's cool, but I like this other guy instead. I said, hey, that's fine. But a few people have noticed that it's my voice. And, of course, I help them along. I put my Twitter banner as the Pathfinder picture. So if you find my page, you're going to notice that I'm Pathfinder. So I'm proud to let people know that I'm in something as cool as Apex Legends.
And now that's the perfect note to end with the video game stuff. And I believe we glossed over a lot of what you have done. You've been in over 100 roles just on video games. You've been in a lot of anime, voiceover stuff. You've been in a lot of television that we didn't really touch upon. And you've had a very untraditional path into voice acting. But what advice do you have for people who want to get involved in acting and, in particular, voice acting?
I actually cover this in VO Notes as well. If somebody wants to check it out, I've got them up on YouTube. It's Chris Edergly's VO Notes, where I talk about getting into the business and what it's like when you're first starting. And my best advice is something you'll hear often from working voice actors, and that is get some training, get any kind of performing experience that you can, whether it's trying stand-up, maybe if you've always wanted to try it, or getting into a play, or taking workshops, because voice acting is acting. You may not use the rest of your body on camera, but you will still use your body for your performance. Even when I'm at home in my booth recording simple auditions, just even for a radio commercial, I still use my hands to gesture. I use everything I have to give that performance. So the more a person can train and study acting, the better they're going to be prepared for the world of voiceover. And don't worry about getting agents. Don't worry about getting on shows or anything until you've had the training, because without that, it's going to be hard to separate yourself from the legions of really talented voice actors out there. Having said that, though, a person shouldn't feel too daunted by it or too overwhelmed by it. Yes, there are a lot of working voice actors now, and there's some insanely talented people out there. But that's no reason for a person who's new at it to think that they can't also join them and make a living from it. So study, get experience, get some performing experience, learn everything you can, take it slow, don't be in a rush, and commit to it. Don't use half measures. Commit to it, because if you don't, it's probably going to be noticeable. The people who do the casting and the agents who are looking for new talent, they want to know that you're really passionate about it, because you're going to need to be, because it's going to be hard in the beginning. I could barely get arrested the first couple of years I was in the business. It took a little while, and then it finally started to click. So stay with it. If it's something you love, you'll know. If it's something you're just sort of curious about, you'll tend to get weeded out after a while.
And then finally, do you have anything you would like to promote? Facebook, Twitter, website?
Yeah, you can find me at chrisedergly.com. There's always something new going up there. I have an online media manager who's constantly posting little tidbits and new information and all that. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Edergly, and you can find me on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel where I've got dozens of clips of my work from over the years, and I've got the VO Notes series that I'm just doing as sort of a public service for anyone that's remotely interested in voice acting, either getting into it or just wondering what voice actors go through. I just made this very quick series of videos where I talk about a few topics. So, yeah, you can catch me on YouTube and Twitter and on my website.
As always, thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast, and we can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher Radio, and anywhere else where you listen to your podcasts. And while you wait for next week's episode, you can definitely check us out at popanimecomics.com for articles relating to anime, comics, and pop culture, as well as give us a follow on Twitter at popanimecomics, like our Facebook page, Pop Anime Comics. Check us out on Instagram at popanimecomics. And if you are feeling that you would like to support us on a monetary level, you could definitely check us out at prowrestlingtees.com, and in the search bar type in Pop Anime Comics and it will bring you right to my shirt. It is an elf holding a steel chair, and she tends to have a temper where when people don't buy my shirt, she tends to want to come and track you down, find you, and hit you with said chair. And this problem can be simply avoided if you go right now to prowrestlingtees.com and buy the shirt. This way you won't get hit with a chair. And until next week, everybody, have a wonderful week.